Is there something that you struggle with as a Christian, but you are so scared to talk about it and you've kept it quiet because you do not want to be judged? If you have ever experienced that, you will want to stick around for today's video. We're talking about 10 struggles that Christians have that we don't talk about because of the shame and the guilt and the judgment around those things. I'm Camelia. Welcome to today's episode. That sun is sunning. That sun is doing its thing. Anyways, thing number one is you don't always feel motivated to pray and to study and to spend time with God. I feel that sometimes too. And there's this guilt and this shame attached to it. Like, how is it that I don't feel this motivation to go read my Bible or to go pray or go spend time with God? And I carry that guilt and I carry that shame sometimes. But of late, one of the things I've been doing is treating my time with God and my prayer time and all that like I would any other mundane activity. And I say mundane because, like bathing, it's a mundane activity. You do it whether or not you want to. And so for me, what I do now is even when I don't feel motivated to study or to pray or to spend time with God, I push myself and I do it. And I've never regretted it. I've never regretted sitting in the presence of God. I've never regretted talking to God. But there are days when I don't get it right. There are days when I'll go through the day and I don't spend any quality time with God. And so if you feel like that and you're also experiencing the shame and the guilt attached to it, know that you're not alone. Others of us here feel it too. And maybe try doing the same thing I do, pushing through and doing that thing, even though you don't feel motivated to do it. This one is a big deal for me, and it is feeling out of place at church. Let me tell you something. I am almost 40 years old. Yeah, I was born and raised in the church, and the experience I've had in terms of church community over the last 2 years have been my roughest, because I've never been in a church space, a church community where I didn't feel like I belong. The current church I go to, I do not feel like I belong. If I'm participating, I do what I need to do, and once church is done, I go home. And some people might say that it's maybe I need to do more in ensuring I create that community. I'm an introvert, so I'll observe from afar, and then I'm like, okay, maybe that person, and I feel like the people who I've observed, I'm like, maybe they could be a part of my circle, and I have tried connecting with them. I don't feel like it was a two-way thing, and so I've stopped. But being a part of a church community and feeling like you belong, it's going to be one of those most important things in your walk as a Christian. And so now I'm now wondering, maybe I need to find a different church where I can find that community. And so if you're in that space as a Christian, whether you're a new believer or not, it is going to make your walk so much harder, because you are going to need people to fellowship with. And so if you're in that space, you will have to decide, do I now change congregation and find a different church? Because that will be a major factor in deciding whether you stay or you leave, just your faith in general sometimes. Next up is balancing or hobbies or career choices or fashion or style with being Christian. I think in terms of fashion, Sarah Jakes Roberts does an amazing job at dressing modestly and dressing fashionably and stylishly while still representing God. As it relates to fashion, particularly for women, it's almost like when you look in the world, what is trendy and what is available, because finding modest clothing sometimes is the hardest thing. In terms of hobbies and career choices, I know, like, I'm Adventist, and growing up becoming an actor or an actress, or just certain jobs that required you to work on Sabbath or required you to do things that are not necessarily cut and dry, they were not an option. If you love dancing, becoming a dancer was never an option. There were just certain hobbies, and I think sometimes we struggle with those things, like, how do I do this and still serve God and still show up and represent God? How do I serve in this space and in this industry without it corrupting me, without it, taking me away from God. My background is journalism. I was a journalist from most of my career, but when I was growing up, that was not presented as an option for me. It was something I was doing. I'm like, Lord, I don't know how this is going to work out, because what if I'm required to work on Sabbath? What if I'm required to do all these different things? But I made a decision I was going to do it still, and working on Sabbath was never going to be an option for me. So once I got a job or I was doing an interview, I'm like, I'm Adventist. I don't work on Sabbaths except during like natural disasters or, emergencies that required me to show up and help provide information that's going to save life. I wouldn't work, and if I did, then I wouldn't take pay for that day. That was my stance at the time. No, I don't have those issues, but trying to balance my hobbies and my fashion and my career choices with ensuring that they match up and I'm not putting myself in a space where I'm not going to be able to represent God is a struggle. I know a lot of us have, and I've had it too. This particular one I don't know much about, but I know it's a struggle. Questions about sexuality and identity. I know there are people who deeply struggle with their sexuality and their identity, even within Christendom. And because of, what we believe and the space that's created around us, sometimes we suffer in silence. And I feel like if there's no safe space within our church or within our religion or faith for us to have those conversations, what that does is that it forces us to go elsewhere to find answers to those questions when they could have been dealt with within a safe space, a non-judgmental space. I don't have much experience with it or much information about it to share. I owe it to myself to do more research on that, and I will. But for now, I know it's a struggle a lot of Christians have, but because of the judgment and the shame and the guilt around it, a lot of people never speak about it, or when they do speak about it, it's almost like they have to be prepared to be thrown out or to be tossed aside, and that should never be the situation. Next up is loneliness, relationships, and just companionship in general. We were made for connection. We were made to do life with other people, and sometimes we will struggle with the idea of, you've done everything right, you were the good girl, you were the good guy, and you went to church and you did all these things and you believed in God, and you're aging up or out, and it's almost like, I've desired this partner, I desired this family, I desired these children, I desire these kinds of friendships, and everybody else around me, it's happening for them but not me. And sometimes it can get in the way where you start feeling jealous or experiencing jealousy toward those who are getting those things that you are not seemingly getting. I think we have to remind ourselves that we serve a God who's the author of time, and he's never late. And then sometimes we sabotage ourselves, because sometimes we hold on to relationships that we know are not good for us, and so God can't give us what he wants for us. Sometimes we have to let go of certain things and certain ideas in order for God to bless us. Otherwise we abuse the blessing. If it's something that you struggle with, tell me where you are in that journey. Put it in the comments. Hand back dry. Let me come closer for this one. The doubts, the questions, the fears that you have about your belief, about God, about your faith. I think a lot of us have questions, but we do not ask them. We do not even entertain them. And I know some of those you have to take captive, right? But there are some other thoughts and other questions that we have, and we would not dare ask them. We would not dare vocalize them, because we do not want to be judged. We do not want anyone to think that we are backsliding, or that we are not where we are supposed to be religiously or spiritually. There was a particular question, I don't remember what it is now, but there was a particular question that I had been asking over the years about my church and my belief system. And I had asked several pastors and elders and all this, and they would just give me an answer that didn't make sense. The answer was more confusing than the question itself. And I struggled with that thing for a number of years, until I asked my pastor at my church at the time, and he was a younger pastor, and he said to me, Camilla, I don't know. I really don't know. I'll have to go back and do some more research and some more study before I can give you an answer. He didn't try to play me over or, take me for a fool, because I felt like the responses that I was being given previously, like, they didn't consider me sensible. They didn't take any time to process where I could be coming from. And so the fact that he was willing to say to me, I do not know, and I'm going to have to research and come back to you with the response, I appreciated that. I don't remember if he actually did, but I think over time I have made peace with it, because I know there are certain things that we will not have answer to until we get to heaven. And so some things we have to believe in by faith. And I think it was one of those things that I made peace with. But it was because of his response that caused me to make peace with it. For one, somebody didn't judge me. For one, somebody was willing to see my point of view and recognize that this is something that was weighing heavily on me. So if you're in that space where you have your questions and your doubts, I say find somebody who you can talk to, who will see the merit in the question that you're asking, or pray to God and ask him to either provide the answer or help you to make peace with that thing, especially if it's not something that is going to be a deciding factor in your salvation. This comparison with others. Like, as Christians, we compare ourselves to others sometimes, whether or not we do it consciously. Like, I remember when I was growing up and I'd see people pray and they'd be decreeing and declaring and, all of those things. And I'm like, why can't I do that? Why can't I feel what they're feeling and experience God the same way? And that carries over into whatever stage you are, because there's always going to be a Christian that's more mature than you are. And sometimes we carry this guilt of not feeling as though we've got to that place. I know it's a struggle a lot of people have. Maybe for even younger Christians, where you come in and you're spending time with God and you're doing all these different things, but when you go to church or you congregate with other believers, you feel as though you're less than. What I remind myself of is that this spiritual walk, this Christian walk, it's a personal relationship and it's individualized. And because you experience God in a particular way doesn't mean that I'm going to experience him a particular way. Because you pray a particular way doesn't mean that I'm required to pray that particular way. And my measuring stick now is Jesus. And so if you're in that space where you're feeling the guilt because you think somebody else is more mature and they're praying and they're preaching and exhorting and doing all these different things better than you are, there's no better than you are. You are at your stage and they are at theirs. As long as you allow Jesus to hold your hand and guide you through, you'll be all right. Dating and setting boundaries is another thing I know a lot of Christians struggle with. But sometimes we don't even bother talking about it, because it's almost like you do what you're convicted to do and I'll do what I'm convicted to do. But we all know what is expected of us. Sometimes when you're dating other Christians from within your same congregation or within your same faith organization, the belief about sexual boundaries before marriage or even after marriage, they can be so different. It becomes even more complicated when you're dating outside of your belief system and your faith, where you now have to explain to someone, these are my boundaries based on what I believe, right? And sometimes you explain it to them, but you start falling in love and they start pushing your boundaries a little more, and you're now becoming flexible with those boundaries, and you're like, where do we stop and how do I maintain these boundaries while still maintaining a relationship with this person? Especially if I find, like, sometimes when you get older, it's almost like, oh, time is running out, so I might as well, just compromise a little. No, I know it's a struggle, but you have to be willing to let go of relationships that force you or that encourage you to not be obedient to what God has asked of you. And I know it's a struggle that whether you're a teen or an adult or an older adult, there is need for companionship. We're never created to be alone, right? And so we are now having to decide, do I fulfill this need for companionship, or do I fulfill my obligation to God to be obedient to Him. If that's a struggle that you've ever had or you're having, or you had and then got over, leave something in the comments so we can, all of us can benefit from it. And if you've struggled with anything that we mentioned before, please share how you got through those struggles. What are the things that you do when you confront those issues? If you're struggling and you want help, you don't have to detail your business, but you can put it in the comment and we can all pray together and figure out how we're going to ensure that in spite of the struggle, we are obedient to what God has asked of us. This one is why I, Camellia, decided a long time ago that in any space I show up, I'm going to be me. I'm going to be myself. And this one is where you struggle with being too Christian for one group and being not Christian enough for another group. I don't show up in any space trying to be anything for anybody. And if you find me to anything, then that's out of my control. I cannot do anything with that information. And so if you're struggling with having different friend groups and different spaces that you have to turn up in, and you go into one space and you're like, they brand you as being too Christian, or you go somewhere else and they brand you as not being Christian enough, settle with Jesus. Find where Jesus is, follow His leading, and be that person wherever you go. I mean, some of us can be very overbearing, especially I notice like some new Christians, they become Christian and everything, like they do not give you a minute to breathe without reminding you that, they are Christian and reciting Bible. I know that can be too much. Balance that out, right? There's a time and a place for everything. The next point is striking a balance between trying to be perfect and trying to be honest. And this is a tough one because there's this expectation, it's sometimes unspoken expectation, that as a Christian you ought to look a particular way and speak a particular way and do all these things within a certain boundary. And of course, you're supposed to live a different life, and people ought to see you and know that you have met Christ and you represent Christ. Absolutely. But there is almost this constant pressure to always be perfect. And so we put on a facade. We show up in church Sabbath after Sabbath, Sunday after Sunday with this facade like we have everything together, when deep down we're struggling. And if we were supposed to find that safe space where we could say to someone, I'm struggling with this. I have these thoughts, and I've been doing these things, and I know it's a weakness, and if you could pray for me or pray with me, or hold me up, hold me accountable. A lot of us would find ourselves closer to perfection than having to just pretend. And if you fall below that perfection line, it's almost like you failed at life and there is no coming back. And so sometimes people don't come and follow Jesus because there's this expectation that they ought to be perfect, and they know within themselves that they can't reach that mark. We have to decide, am I going to be perfect or am I going to be honest? And so often, because we want community and we want to fit in, we err on the side of tending to be perfect and miss out on the opportunity to be honest with ourselves and others so that we can grow and develop and become better. And so just remember that no Christian, pastor, preacher, reverend, priest, regular church member, deacon, elder, none of us has it all figured out. We are trying to do our best. And so do not judge how Christian you are, how faithful you are. Don't judge any of those things based on another human being. Jesus is our measuring stick. If any of these struggles resonated with you, leave a comment. Let's have a conversation, a post conversation in the comment section, and we see how we can create safer spaces for people to show up as their true authentic self, for people to be honest about the things that they struggle with, and spaces where we can pray together and figure out how and what we're doing and how best to do it so that we meet the standards that God has set for us. And that's our video for this week, guys. Thank you so much for stopping by. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.